With our People of the Book series, and tonight we are doing passages from Sfas Emes. Sfas Emes was the second Ger Rebbe. One of the great Hasidic dynasties is that of the Ger Hasidim. Ger, the town of Ger, is a Polish suburb, tiny hamlet actually, outside of Warsaw, called Góra Kalavaria in Polish. And the Jews, as was the case in most of Eastern Europe, the Gentiles had one name for the towns and the cities, and the Jews had a different name. The Jews simply called it Ger. I want to speak a little bit about the author and about the work we're going to be studying tonight before we get to the actual passages. First, let's speak about the provenance, if you will. Remember, when we began Series 3 last week, and our topic was Yisrael Salanter, I told you that he was the father of a movement that with the passage of time branched out and became, to borrow Mayor Dinkin's coinage, a beautiful mosaic. It's very hard to say there's a monolithic Mussar movement. There's one kind of Mussarist. The basic thematic underpinnings that bind the movement together as a movement, something that's universal, if you will, to the movement. But then there are things that make a Nevardik Bal Mussar a Nevardik, and a Slabodka Bal Mussar a Slabodka Bal Mussar. And certainly when you're talking about the movement, the modern Hasidic movement, which had about a century jump or so on the Mussar movement, that's even more so. The bifurcation, the branching out of the movement into a lot of tributary streams and sub-movements is very pronounced. Or at least it was very pronounced up until World War II. During World War II, during the Holocaust, when so many different Hasidic tribes were pretty much exterminated altogether, there was a kind of coalescing again within the movement. But certainly up until World War II, there were many, many branches. So it's informative, just as if you remember the blurb that I wrote, Dr. Sommer, remind me after class. I have to give you something. Okay. As I wrote in the blurb about this series, that the 19th century was a time of tremendous intellectual ferment. There were great writers, there were great movements being born in the 19th century. Just as it would be silly, in a certain sense, to study the works of, shall we say, Trotsky, without knowing anything about Lenin or Marx, so it would be inadequate of me to speak about, and certainly to try to study passages from the book Sfas Emes without knowing anything of the provenance of his spiritual ancestors, if you will. So let me talk about that for a few minutes. Most of us who are not Hasidim ourselves, or who do not, see Hasidim up close and personal, or who didn't have a Hasidic grandparent, have a very kitsch, if you will, impression of what Hasidim are all about, basically gleaned either from Chabad telethons or from Fiddler on the Roof. We don't have a very realistic picture of what Hasidus is or what Hasidim are. But this much that filters through has at least a kernel of truth about it. There is something about the Hasidic movement that appeals to the Jewish common man and woman, if you will. There's something about it that's very joyous, that's very ecstatic, that's very mystical. If that's true of the Hasidic revolution, or Reformation, shall we call it, then consider the Pshischa Hasidus a kind of counter-Reformation.
The what?
Pshischa.
How's Polish?
Yes, it's spelled Parziuscha or something like that, at least transliterated in English. It's pronounced Pshischa. That's actually a town that I think the Jews and the Gentiles pronounce the same way. It's spelled in English P-R-S-Z-Y-C-H-A. Pshischa. Okay, anyway. There are two great rabbis, two great Hasidic masters from Pshischa, the Rebbe Rabbinim, and before him the Yiddakaj, the holy Jew of Pshischa. And basically, what Pshischa was about was giving what had become, if you will, a soft, squishy, mushy, feel-good kind of movement, giving it back its hard edge. And In Pshischa, whereas in traditional Hasidus, shall we say, a public enemy number one in a person's spiritual development was depression. Starting in the Pshischa school, public enemy number one became self-deception. If we want to use the model of Jacob's ladder, about Jacob's ladder it says, V'hinei sulam mutzav arza, v'rosha magia shamayma. Okay, we have Chumash in front of us. Let's take a look at the English translation of that. Take a look. On page 131. Verse 12. Okay, we're going to be using the Siddur a little bit later tonight too, but for right now, let's just use the Chumash. Okay, everyone have the place? Hine sulam mutzav arza, v'raisim mezir shma. 12, the translation is, he had a vision in a dream. A ladder was standing on the ground and its top reached toward heaven. Okay. Reached toward heaven, again, is the translator's emendation to make it a little bit more readable. It reached heaven. So the model, if you will, is like as follows. Okay, the symbol of spiritual ascent is something that's on the ground, it's rooted in the ground. Okay? Keep your head in the stars, but keep your feet on the ground. That's the paradigm. And the sense of Shizcha was that the Hasidic movement had gotten too much towards head in the stars and had lost its rootedness in the ground. Okay? People were self-delusional, people were studying Kabbalistic texts that were way above their scholarship level, they were engaging in ecstatic practices that were really beyond their spiritual level. When it came to studying the revealed part of the Torah, they had lost the intellectual rigor and precision that was the hallmark of high Torah scholarship in previous generations, and they wanted to turn the clock back. Okay? And perhaps the greatest expositor of this, or where it reached a fever pitch, was in a Polish town called Kotsk, the great Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, who was known as a pillar of truth, and he was the furthest thing that we can think of from a stereotypical touchy-feely kind of rabbi. Literally, when he walked into a room, the Hasidim fled from terror. His was a reign of terror, not a reign of terror like Stalin. He didn't kill anyone, but he was just awe-inspiring, and he was withering in his criticism of people and in exploding people's self-inflated ego balloons and self-delusions and cherished received wisdom. This is what the Kotzker Rebbe was all about. One of the peer disciples of the Kotzker Rebbe was somebody who became known in the annals of Chassidic history as the Chiddushei Harim, named after his book, eponymous work, Chiddushei Harim. The novelette of Rim is an acronym Rabbi Yitzchak Meir. Okay, Itchamaya is a very popular Polish Hasidic name. They're all named after that Rebbe, the founding Rebbe of Ger Hasidus. The Chiddushei Harim had 13 children, all of whom died in his own lifetime. His last surviving son bore him, if you will, a grandson before he died. And this young boy was the author of the works that we're going to be starting tonight. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leib Alter, and he became known, again, eponymously after his work. He was known as the Sfas Emes, which means the lip of truth. Okay? We can see again reflected the Kotz paradigm of the searching and the striving for truth is what he wanted his works to be known as.
Did they die, Rabbi? I'm sorry. Did they die because there was some kind of sin that incurred, which caused him to die in his lifetime?
You know, let's save it. Yes, we're going to get way off the topic, but you're onto something. Let's save it at this time of the question and answer period. I'll talk about that. At any rate, this fellow, the Chiddushei Harim, was born in 1847, and he died at the age of 58 in 1905. So he's a true 19th century figure, 19th century Rebbe, right? Born right in the middle of the century, died at the turn of the next century, the turn of the 20th century. He was a true 19th century Rebbe. At any rate, he was born in 1847. His grandfather, the Chiddushei Harim, died in 1866. For 4 years, he did not assume the post of rabbi. He did become Rav, he became the chief rabbi of this little hamlet of Ger, the suburb of Warsaw, but he did not become a Hasidic master, the leader of the Hasidic congregation, flock, if you will, till 4 years later. During those 4 years, he himself traveled, as was the custom in pre-war Hasidic world. It wasn't that people lived in neighborhoods surrounding the Rebbe. The Rebbe, more often than not, lived in these tiny little hamlets, and he went on a kind of pilgrimage several times a year, usually, during holidays or certain Shabbosim of the year. He traveled to a Polish town called Alexander, where he was a Rebbe of the Rebbe of Heinrich of Alexander, another one of the same school as a disciple of the Kotzker Rebbe. 4 years later, in 1870, when Reb Heinrich of Alexander, passed, basically, al-apa val-chamas, as the expression goes in Hebrew, against his will, he was kind of forced into the Rabbistva, into being the Rebbe back in his hometown of Ger, and thus, I can't say started the Ger Hasidic dynasty. It had been started by his grandfather, but it really bloomed and branched out up until the point where, right at the outbreak of World War II in Poland in 1939, it was estimated that, counting men, women, and children, there were more than 1 million Ger Hasidim in Poland. So it was the largest Hasidic group in history in pre-war. We still don't have Hasidic groups post-war that have approximated those levels, even despite explosive population growth and very large families. It'll still be a while before the world sees anything like what Ger Hasidus was. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the person, the Sfas Emes, and the passages that we're going to be studying tonight. There's a lot to say about him, and again, if I was giving a Jewish history class, I could spend several hours speaking about the Chidush Harim. But suffice it to say that, in a certain sense, he was the Mozart of Hasidus, by which I mean he was a child prodigy. That the man was destined to be a great Rebbe was pretty evident from a very, very young age. Now, the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of hagiography, is the word it's called. It's not that easy to find a warts and all biography, if you will, a real muckraking, investigative reporting, warts and all biography of great Hasidic leaders or great, Torah leaders of any stripe. But the kind of stories that they tell about the Sfas Emes, of his early brilliance and his sobriety, if you will, his precocious maturity, were all the hallmarks that he was destined for grace, that he had Rebbe timber, so to speak, from a very, very young age. If Shakespeare, again I say lahavdil, to differentiate between the holy and the mundane, if Shakespeare had left the world only his sonnets, he would have been one of the all-time literary greats. If he had left the world only his plays, and no sonnets at all, again, he would have been one of the world's all-time literary greats. That he was so great a playwright, and also so great a poet, is something that in our age of specialization and one-dimensional, we multitask a lot, but we tend to be very one-dimensional. And at Ambrose Bierce say, specialization means knowing more and more about less and less. Right? To have a figure that can excel at both is something that really boggles the mind. If the Sfas Emes had never been a Rebbe, if he had never moved a Hasidic disciple to ecstasy or to spiritual growth, and the only thing that he had ever left the world were his works on Shas, on the Talmud, it would have secured his place in Jewish letters very famously and very securely. What I'm trying to say is, Chedusha Sfas Emes, which is not what we're going to be studying tonight, consider it his prose work, if you will. We're studying more poetry. All right? The novelette that the Sfas Emes left on Shas is a classic of Achronic literature. There's nary a yeshiva that studies the tractates of Moed, that's the part of the Talmud that deals with holidays, or Kodshin, the part of the Talmud that deals with temple service, where this is not a must-read text. When you're trying to study those tractates, you've got to be doing it with Sfas Emes. It's clear, it's anti-pilpul, which again is kind of a counter-reformation to what Hasidic scholarship was. I'm talking about Hasidic scholarship outside of the field of Hasidus. I'm talking about the great Hasidic masters who are also great rabbinic geniuses. The Avnei Nezer, the Sachet, the Divrei Chaim, his own grandfather, Chedush Rim. There's not a word of pilpul in Sfas Emes.
Well, I'm sorry.
Pilpul?
Yeah.
Pilpul is a method of Talmudic study that cross-references texts all scattered throughout the Talmud and creates, some would argue tenuous, some would argue solid connections between the two. But the point is, you need like an encyclopedic breadth to be a pilpulist. You can't just be studying the text that you're studying. Okay? The Sfas Emes' approach was to write for the page, on the page, as it were, and to basically not be looking for corroborative proof texts from all over the Talmud, but just to use pristine reason and logic to try to explain away the difficulties. And it's very short, it's very crisp, it's very to the point. And again, the nicest thing you can say about it is, as we're going to see in one of the passages we're going to be learning tonight, is there's an expression, nikaren divrei emes. Sometimes when it's true, it rings true. You just know it. And that's one of the hallmarks of the Sfas Emes on Shas. That such a work, which could easily be mistaken for the work of one of the anti-Hasidic, great Lithuanian thinkers. If Rabbi Chaim Brisker was going to write a commentary on Shas, it would probably look like something very similar to Sfas Emes. That such a man could at the same time write the stream of consciousness, heartfelt, soulful Hasidus that we're about to learn tonight is mind-boggling. In other words, the eclecticness of his genius, of his personality is something that really makes him a unique figure. Just a few stories to give you some of the flavor of the man, the humility, the truth-singing, and so on. When he finally was forced, basically, he had been forced when his grandfather died. There was a large group of Chassidim that wanted him to become Rabbi immediately, but like I said, he became a follower of Rabbi of Alexander for 4 years. When he finally ascended the throne, if you will, in 1870, he didn't ascend the throne. He comes out several weeks, Schwartz time I believe it was, when Rabbi Alexander had passed away, and for several weeks afterwards, he comes down to the traditional Friday night, or Shal Shudas, the third Shabbos meal, and he sits himself down, instead of at the head of the table, he sits himself down in the middle of the table. And one of the older Chassidim lean over to him, and he says, we're traditionalists, we're Jews that follow the Masorah tradition. Das Team, you should do like your grandfather did. So he says, I will, don't worry. This happens a second time, a third time. Finally, the third week, again, this fellow leans over and he says, come on, we're waiting for you to go to the head of the table. You should do like your grandfather did. So he says, now I'm doing what my grandfather did. So this already they can't take. Finally, somebody screwed up his courage, because after all, this young man, he's all of 23 years old, but he's the new Rebbe. He said, Rebbe, please explain to us. We want to understand you. You're a Rebbe. You're supposed to teach us things. You can't be, totally inscrutable. We have to understand what you're saying. What do you mean you're doing like your grandfather did? Your grandfather sat at the head of the table. You're sitting in the middle of the table. So I said, no, you don't understand. My grandfather imitated no one, and I shall imitate no one. And again, this is very Kotskian, if you will. Okay, the Kotzker Rebbe used to say that a stamp, a rubber stamp, to validate contracts according to Talmudic law, has to be a ksav sheni yochel izdaif, has to be something that it's impossible to forge. And the Kotzker Rebbe used to say, that's why our sages teach us, chosma shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu emes, the signet ring of God is truth. He says, why? Because the Talmud defines a chosem, a stamp, has to be something that cannot be forged. He says, if it's imitative, it's already not truth. That's not something you can forge. If it's an imitation, then it's not the real article, it's not the genuine article. There's one story about the Sfas Emes. Another story is, towards the end of his life, there was a Russo-Japanese war, and he was always kind of an ascetic turn of personality. He didn't eat much, he didn't sleep much. But for the last 4 or 5 years of his life, he did not sleep on a bed. He slept on the floor. And when queried about this, it was very bad for his health. You see, he died young. He died at 58. It was not something that would be a recipe for longevity. Certainly, you can be sure you didn't get a very good night's sleep that way. He said, I have Hasidim who are fighting in the Rus. At that time, Poland was on an independent country, had been absorbed by the Russians. And they had been sent, some Hasidim couldn't get out of the draft. And they were fighting as Russian soldiers in the Russo-Japanese War. He says, I have guys sleeping on the hard ground in the trenches somewhere, and I should luxuriate myself in a bed? I can't do that. So, I'm trying to bring out, the sense of empathy and the sense of leadership that he had was something really extraordinary. Okay, I think, again, I could speak more, but that would take up a whole night. We won't have any time to examine any of the texts that we're going to do. One last thing I want to say about the work, which is also reflective of the author. When you have these eponymous works, Chavetz Chaim, Rambam, Sfas Emes, the line between the author and the book sometimes gets a little bit blurred. Open up, if you will, your Sidurim for 1 minute. Page 579. I want to tell you one of the things that make Sfas Emes unique in the annals of Hasidic literature. I find, anyway. Some later works, especially the Ger Rebbes, have sadly imitated this style, but the Chidusharim kind of innovated it.
What page was it?
Page 579. Page 579, we're going to be doing Mishnah 26, at the very bottom of the page. Okay, this is from Pirkei Avos. Ben Bagbag says, delve into the Torah and continue to delve in it, for everything is in it. Look deeply into it. Grow old and gray over it, and do not stir from it. Okay, the part I want is grow old and gray over it. Torah is an amazing work. In any other field of endeavor, okay, when a person goes to grade school and they start English, the study of the English literature, okay, so you're studying Dick and Jane. Maybe in some Montessori schools they use Dr. Seuss. I don't know what they use for the elementary texts, right? But you don't expect a Yale PhD in English literature. They're studying Chaucer, they're studying Shakespeare, whatever they're studying. They're not reading Dick and Jane, and they're not reading Dr. Seuss anymore, right? Torah, a Cheder Yingel, a kid in first grade, studies Chumash and Rashi, and Ramosha Feinstein studies Chumash and Rashi. Torah is the only text, to my knowledge, that is immediately accessible, even on the most elementary levels. But hafachba v'hafachba, what does Ben Bagbag tell us? They translate as delve into it, but the literal translation is turn it over and turn it over again. It's a multifaceted jewel, and the more you turn it and the more you handle it, the more facets reveal themselves. Okay, this mandate is realized in the Sefer Sfas Emes. The way the structure of the book, the way you open up the book, he ascended the throne in 1870, I guess it was, Shavuos time, around Shavuos time, 1870. His first Torah on Hanukkah is from Hanukkah 1871. And in each successive year, the way the book is arranged is, all the Torah that was from 1870, that's one section. It's not arranged topical, well it is, Hanukkah, okay, but all the Torah from 1870, then all the Torah from 1871, 1872, every year that he said Torah until 1905. And what's striking is, year after year after year, parsha after parsha, holiday after holiday, he's talking about the same midrashim. He didn't get bored. He didn't think that he had plumbed the depths of it. He didn't think that for the variety and the spice of life, I have to find something new. I mean, there are some new pieces occasionally. But what's very characteristic of this book is he'll be saying Torah on the same medrash for 30 years. And there's a nuance of difference from year to year if you study it closely. Right? This idea of handling the Torah, it's like a glowing coal or it's like a diamond, and turning it, it's the same Torah. But obviously he wasn't static, obviously he wasn't growing, he wasn't the same man at 58 as he was at 23. He grew with the Torah, he grew old with the Torah. But the Torah didn't grow old on him. That's number one. Number two, which is not totally unique to Sfas Emes, but is that the best way I can illustrate it is something that I once heard, I forgot who said this, Rav Hirsch or Rav Hutner, I forgot who said this. in trying to explain our tripartite biblical canon. We have Torah, 5 books of Moses, we have Nevi'im, we have the prophets, and we have Kesuvim, the holy writings. Now the holy writings were written by the prophets as well. Right? King Solomon was a prophet, and we have 3 books of the holy writings, Mishlei, Shir Hashirim, and Koheles, that come from King Solomon. King David's words are recorded in the books of Samuel, part of the prophets, and the book of Psalms and Tehillim, part of the holy writings. What's exactly the difference? And basically, one of the explanations I heard was that this is all divinely inspired, this is all messages being imparted by God to and through the prophets. Messages that were meant to be in the first place oratory for the living audience, the generation of the prophet, but were later recorded because they had eternal significance for all generations. That's part of the books of the prophets. And those that went straight, as it were, to writing, those are called Kesuvim. So we know that there's a difference between written expression and oral expression. And very often there's a difference, there's certainly in the contemporary Jewish market, Rabbi Franz speaks, Rabbi Miller speaks. There are a lot of books today that are taken as transcriptions from audio tapes. And they read differently than a book that was written by the author trying to write, meaning to write. Right? This was written by the author's own hand. But they were basically his own transcriptions of his Tish Torah. Okay, the classic Hasidic gathering is a Tish, a table. The Rebbe comes together with his Hasidim on holidays, on Sabbaths, on minor festivals, right? And he says Torah at the Tish. And you kind of have to get the flavor, the feel for the stream of consciousness and the ecstatic ambience of a Tish when you're reading these passages. I mean, also part of it is my fault that no translation was available, so I tried my own hand. I'm the translator here, right? So that may be missing something. But you also have to understand that even though the author wrote this and prepared it for publication, the sense of it is, I'm leaving over for my Hasidim recordings. They didn't have video recordings, they didn't have audio recordings. I'm leaving you something in print that was really meant for those of you who heard it when I spoke it, when I taught it to you orally. Okay, having given all those hakdamas, I don't know how much time we have left to study, but let's do so. Take one and pass it around. Okay, I'm not going to go in order. I have 4 passages here that I translated. 3 are on Hanukkah, and 1 is from Parshas Toldos. Okay. I'm going to start with the 3rd passage, and I'll tell you why. Remember, the first thing I said in my preamble remarks is that every great movement has certain planks in the platform, if you will, that are universal to the movement, and other things that make each tributary of the movement unique. To me, the 3rd piece here, that's from Hanukkah 1876, is classic Hasidic Torah. Okay, by classic Hasidic Torah, okay, you know what? Let the piece speak for itself. Let me read it first, and then I'll tell you what I meant by saying it's classic Hasidic Torah. Okay, the psalmist writes. This by psalmist, that means King David in Tehillim, in the book of Psalms. Nasata lireyecha nes lihisnoses. Thou hast given a banner. Nes means a banner, to rally around, lihisnoses, to them that fear thee. Lireyecha, to those that have fear of God, awe of heaven. You've given them a banner to rally around. Okay. So what's the literal meaning? The literal meaning is, before I read on, the literal meaning is, and like I said, the word nes in biblical Hebrew means a banner. We say it in davening every day, in the silent devotion, the sun nes, we're trying to raise up a banner to gather in our exiles. Okay, so a nes can mean a flag, a banner. Okay, what's the difference between a nes and a degel? To me, it's like, you ever see those medieval movies where the people riding with the king, have like these vertical banners with a flagpole in the middle of it? I think that's what a nes is in in contradistinction to a degel where the pole is on the side and it flips, horizontally. Okay. Now he's going to give it what we call a Hasidic twist. His definition of what the psalmist is writing here. This means that we need to transcend the limitations of our own nature in serving God to a degree corresponding to the miracles which He has wrought for us. A whole new definition of what King David is instructing us. Nosat l'recha neis lihisnoses. Now before I read on, let me tell you how he gets from point A to point B. Yes, it's true that the word nes means a banner. Nisim would mean banners. But when we sing Chanukah Sha'asa Nisim Lavoseinu Bayamim Ha'im Ba'azman Hazeh, what do we mean? Who made banners? For what does it mean? Colloquially and even literally, sometimes the word nes can also mean a miracle. Okay? So this text in the Psalms bears a level of meaning also. You gave to those that fear you a miracle for what now can't be to rally around anymore. So now what does lihisnoses mean? So he's defining it to mean as follows. In Hebrew grammar, there is a conjugation of verbs called the binyan hispel, which means the reflexive construct. Okay? I want to dress somebody, that's lihalbish. I want to get myself dressed, it's lihit labesh. Whenever there's a hey suf, a hey tough, at the beginning of the word, it's reflexive, which means the subject of the verb and the object of the verb are one and the same. You're doing it to yourself. Okay? Nosata lirecha nes. You gave those that fear you a miracle. Why? Lihisnoses. That they should miracularize themselves. What does that mean? What's a miracle? A miracle means going above, breaking, if you will, transcending the laws of nature. Okay? If God would make this voice recorder levitate 4 inches off the table, or make me be able to turn it off on the first try after the class, okay? That's a miracle. That's defying science. It's defying the laws of nature. Okay? We human beings, the Sfas Emes is positing, have a capacity to be miracle workers too, at least within the confines of our own nature. As God can break and transcend the nature of His world, we can break and transcend the nature of our own private little worlds. Again, this means that we need to transcend the limitations of our own nature in serving God to a degree corresponding to the miracles which He has wrought for us. Okay? Big miracle, we should break and transcend our natures to a very great degree. Smaller miracle that has to do with light, we need to bring light into ourselves. Okay, let me read on. The light with which a miracle illumines, I hope I pronounced that right, the human soul, enhances his or her strength above and beyond their nature, and elevates their spiritual level. This is the meaning of the phrase lihisnoses. Stop, pause. In other words, lihisnoses no longer means on its literal level to rally around, go to the banner, go around the banner, but make a miracle in yourself. Reflexive. Do a miracle to yourself. Therefore, during these miraculous days, it is incumbent upon us to strengthen ourselves in His service. Similarly, there's an additional underlying meaning to the blessing that concludes with the words, V'higiyanu lazman hazeh, and brought us to this season, as follows, right? We make first night of Chanukah, we pronounce 3 benedictions of the lights. L'hadik ner shel Chanukah, or l'hadik ner Chanukah, depending on your nusach. Shasa nisim la'v'senu b'yamahem b'zman hazeh. Those 2 brachas we make every night of Chanukah. The first night of Chanukah we also make a shechiyanu, like by every occasional mitzvah, shechiyanu lazman hazeh. And the way Art Scroll translates it is, and brought us to this season, lazman, to this time, to this season. But now, in light of how he understands the verse in the Psalms, he understands the benediction differently as well. That we should have a touch, a contact, a cleaving to the illumination of these days. Lahagia can mean to reach, to attain, to arrive at a destination. But lahagia can also mean to touch. Okay? In frum dating today, one of the first questions asked is, are you shomer negia? Do you keep the law of no premarital touching one another? Right? Negia, lahagia means to touch. Okay? Shehigiyanu, lazman hazeh. You cause us to touch, reach out and touch, not someone, sometime. I'm touching this time. I can grasp it. I have a physical, almost near physical connection to the nature of this time. Certainly, every Jewish person connects to the illumination of miracles. And although we may not feel it in our souls, we don't feel miraculous, we feel very workaday. So, I had a few jelly donuts, I had a few latkes. Yeah, it was nice, the lights were very nice, maybe I had 4 nanoseconds of contemplation, of reflection by the Hanukkah lights this year. But after that, it's back to work. It's business as usual, right? We don't feel miraculous. We don't feel transcendent in any way. We need to believe that it is so. That God basically makes us touch the miraculous, makes us interface with the miraculous. Ultimately, we feel it commensurate to the level that we believe it to be so. Okay. I want to expound upon this, but I want everyone, I gave too much commentary. Read over this piece, if you will. Take 2-3 minutes to read over this piece. I want to tell you how many classic Hasidic ideas come out of this piece. No, you don't have to read the other 3 pieces right now. Just read this piece again for a minute, if you will. Okay, let's go through them one by one. Okay, one classic hallmark of Hasidic Torah, and like I said, this is very different from the way he would write. He would never write something like this on a passage in the Talmud. This is not his style when he's a commentary on the Talmud. Is to break new ground, if you will, in biblical commentary and biblical exegesis, I believe is the way I pronounce the word, to say things that are very, very far removed from Pshat. This is not Pshat. This is not the meaning of the text. The text means you made for us a banner to gather around. It does not mean what it's saying here. But that's what the great Rebbes did. The great Rebbes said things that basically had never been said before. They saw it, and this is all part of what I said before, about turning the Torah and turning it again, that the Torah doesn't grow old. That you find something new within every passage of the Torah they can deal with. And if you have to say something radical in order to say something new, something that a critic would say he's torturing the text. I don't believe he's torturing the text, because I have a little Hasidic streak in me. Okay? But a real, misnagid would say, well, what are you talking about? That's not what Dovid HaMelech meant. That's not what the text means. So that's number one. For better or for worse, it's very classic Hasidic to take the text out of its very plain meaning and to say something radically different. Okay?
But it's their common language among them, which was representative of that time. So they understood it within that context. You know what I'm saying? It was fashionable.
What do you mean was fashionable?
Those words, the way they describe the frame of reference that they made.
You're talking about in the Sfas Emes times, or you're talking about King David's times?
King David, with the terminology.
Yeah, but the point is, I don't think anyone, again, let's see what you have to understand, that it's not a work of ancient poetry, it's divinely inspired. So divinely inspired can have 70 meanings at least, shall we say. Okay? But in plain conversational Hebrew of people who were contemporaries of King David, his no-says did not mean to do something miraculous to yourself. Absolutely not. And not even on a double entendre level. Okay, fine.
That terminology, maybe it was just what they used.
It was what they used, but it's not what it meant. It meant to gather around. Yeah. This no-says means to do something with a banner.
What I'm saying, what I'm trying to explain is, there's an understanding that they had between them, that they communicated.
Okay,
It wasn't viewed like we see it here.
could be, but I'm just saying that all biblical exegesis up until the advent of the Chassidic movement would never have defined the verse this way.
I believe.
Okay, that's first of all.
Yeah.
Second of all, the appeal to the hidden, if you will, mysterious greatness of the common man. He's talking to huge multitudes of Jews at his Tisha. He's got Rabbanim, he's got Sheikhtim, ritual slaughters, he's got some great Jewish scholars too. But they represent 10%, 15% of the total population of his following. Okay? You've got the middling crowd, and then you've got some very, very simple people. You've got shoemakers, you've got tailors, you've got guys who sit in the crowd with the equivalent of a 5th grade education. A 5th grade education in the old country in Torah was probably equivalent to 12 years of schooling by us today, but the point is, you're not talking to any apparently spiritual supermen or great Torah scholars here. Right? And nevertheless, basically he's telling them is, you can all be miracle workers. Everyone listening to me, okay? You can all be miracle workers. That's another thing that's classic Chassidus. Another thing is talking about oires, talking about light, talking about trying to see hidden lights within the Torah and within your soul, within yourself. Is another very classic Chassidish theme. And finally, the way he ends it, he says, you've got to suspend your disbelief sometime. Okay? A lot of us tend to be very skeptical, very cynical. We say, look, what do you want from me? I don't mean Rabbi me, I mean Rabbi Alter, Rabbi the Sfas. I'm an Orthodox Jew, I'm a Torah observant Jew. Maimonides laid down 13 principles of faith for me. Some of them are very, very hard to believe in. And yet I believe in them. What more do you want me to believe in? No, I want you to believe in more. I want you to believe in yourself. Because without that spiritual self-confidence, you're not going to be able to make the strides. He says, why don't I feel plugged into a holiday? Why do I feel hollow? The holidays, I see the Rabbi, his eyes are on fire, and the way he makes the brachas, the kedusha, the holiness is palpable. Why don't I feel that? Well, he's saying part of the reason why you don't feel it is because you don't believe you're capable of it. The more you believe you're capable of it, the more you would feel it. That's how he concludes. Okay, so he's not just saying, remember, this is not an abstract scholar writing books. He's giving pep talks, if you will, spiritual instruction and pep talks to his Chassidim. And basically he's ending the piece by saying, you can do it. You just have to believe that you can do it. Okay? And finally, if time's going to allow, I'm going to do maybe one more piece of the 4 I wrote over here. But I just want to say that there's something, again, that he speaks about year after year after year after Hanukkah, quoting his grandfather, quoting the Chiddushei Arim. There are a lot of expressions vis-a-vis Hanukkah that have to do with the word regel. The word really literally means a foot. For example, one of the one of the shiurim, the time limits that the Talmud gives for when the Hanukkah lamp should be lit is ad shetichla regel min hashuk, until the passerbys of the marketplace have all gone home for the evening. And the way the Gemara says, shetichla regel, when pedestrian traffic stops, when the feet stop. Okay. Another biblical verse they use very, very often is ner l'ragli dvarecha. Your words are a lamp unto my feet. Another thing that the Talmud says about all neiros, kindling of all lamps, Shabbos and Chanukah, haragil b'ner having leibanim talmidei chacham. If you ragil, if you habituate yourself to do the mitzvahs of the candles of the lamps, you'll have children who will be talmidei chacham, will be Torah scholars. So quoting his Zaydah, quoting the Chiddushei Arim, he says like this, he says there's one common thread through all of these expressions. Regel can mean a foot, but regel can also mean habituation. There's nature and there's second nature. Okay? Sometimes Okay, or if you want to give it the more modern vernacular, there's nature and there's nurture. But nurture and reinforcement, whether it's positive or negative, okay, and constant repetition of the same habits again and again and again and again, sometimes have as firm a grip on us as real nature, as true nature. So the Chedush says, any nace, any kind of a miracle, is a breakthrough from the old, from the repetitive. It's a departure from nature. But sometimes we feel more imprisoned by our second nature than by our actual nature. Could be our actual nature, we'd be capable of doing more than what we're actually doing. But second nature, I'm in such a rut. It's not a groove anymore, it's a rut. So many bad habits, a lifetime of habits, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years of the same bad habits. I can't break that anymore. And the Chedush says no. Okay? Ad shetichla regel. The whole mitzvah of Ner Chanukah is until the regel, until the regilus, okay, the habituation is tichla, is consumed. No more regilus, no more blaming it on my yesterdays, on my day before yesterday, and my last week, and my last month, and a lifetime of that. That's what a miracle teaches you. A miracle teaches you that you can break the pattern of a yesterday. Okay, so I think even though he doesn't mention it directly in this piece, I think he's talking about that as well. Again, if you prepare for the classes I had and read 40 or 50 pieces here on Hanukkah, you see that that's a major theme. That second nature, in a certain sense, is sometimes harder to break than first nature. And when he talks about being illuminated and basking in the glow of the miracle of Hanukkah and interfacing with the miracle of Hanukkah and transcending your nature that way, I think he's referring to that too. Okay, so far, like I said, this is like the universally Hasidic. Now let's look at something that I think is more uniquely Ger Kutz, Pshuscha, if you will. Okay, let's take a look at the second piece. Hanukkah of 1875. The Maharal, okay, that was a 16th century Jewish thinker, he actually antedated the Hasidic movement, writes that Yavan, equals the Greeks, wanted the Jews to disintegrate themselves through Chachma, wisdom, by drawing them to the outer disciplines. Okay, I wrote footnotes here, let me just say quickly, okay? He's alluding to two things over here. Number one, in Judaism we talk about different kinds of cognition. And maybe some of you who've had something to do with Lubavitch know about this already. Chabad is an acronym that stands for Chachma, Bina, Das. Okay, loosely translated as wisdom, understanding, knowledge. To me, the Hebrew doesn't say anything and the English doesn't say anything. What's the difference between wisdom, understanding, and knowledge? Okay, we can all, we can do stream of consciousness and everyone can share, what they think the nuanced differences. Let me tell you, at the end of this piece, the way he's defined at least Chachma and Das. He's not really talking about Bina. Suffice it to say that our sages said there is Chachmas HaTorah, the Chachma of Torah, and what they call Chachmos Chitzonios, outer Chachmos. And the paradigms, the bearers, if you will, the carriers, in particular of all of humanity, of Chachmos Chitzonios, of the outer wisdoms, were the Greeks. Okay, we don't need to belabor the point. That's something that's not really a Jewish concept, it's a universal concept. The Western civilization owes a tremendous debt to the Greeks. Whether it be in politics, whether it be in geometry, whether it be in philosophy, whether it be in architecture, in art, right? The Greeks were a very wise people. Brilliant civilization. Okay, and brilliant intellectually. So many disciplines, so many branches of human knowledge, and human science, and human wisdom, where they made great breakthroughs and lasting impressions and imprints on all of humanity. It's an inarguable point. Nevertheless, the Sage of the Torah had a kind of dismissive term for that called Chachmas Chitzonios. Yes, it's Chachma, but it's outer. It's external. And they tried to beguile, it says they tried to disintegrate the Lashon, let me get the exact Hebrew Lashon, was 35, Lamed Hey, give me a second. It's a hard word to translate. I said disintegrate. Lahavir more or less means like to get them to convert, to get them to abandon Judaism. to transgress, literally. But it doesn't mean to transgress a particular mitzvah. It means to get them to stop being Jews, to Hellenize. Okay. It seems that the etymology of the word yavan is related to the word ona'ah, cheating. Right? Gemara gives an example. It's a prohibition of the Torah. In the Torah it says, Lo sonu ish es amisa. One person should not cheat another person. One of the examples that the Talmud and the law codes give, don't, if you're a fruit seller, okay, don't cover up the fruits that you've had in your fruit stand for 3 days. You got a shipment today from your wholesaler of brand new fruits, don't cover up the old fruits with the new fruits. Person will see the new fruits and assume everything, and he'll just load up a pound or two of fruits, and he'll get home, and half the stuff that he bought is going bad. It's going to spoil tomorrow. Okay, it's a classic example of Jewish business ethics, halakhic business ethics. Don't cheat that way. Don't put something on the outside that's beguiling, that's fresh, that's crispy, that's beautiful, to hide something that's about to go, so to speak. All right? So he's saying yavan, you can hear it literally. Yavan and onah are related to one another. And now he says something I think very profound about the nature of truth and falsehood and illusion and reality and mirage and miraculous. Listen to this. They sought to hoodwink the Bnei Yisrael because knowers of knowledge have ample opportunities to substitute lies for truth, as what differentiates the two are subtle, fine points. Okay? I have a confession to make, and maybe I'm stupid, maybe I'm reflective of my fundamentalist Jewish attitudes. I don't vote Democratic, generally speaking. Okay? Having said that, I think that if you're talking about pure intellect, Bill Clinton is probably the most brilliant president of the 20th century. And beginning, I guess, of the 21st. Did he make it to the 21st century? I don't remember. Okay? The man was brilliant. Okay? And it was him, I believe, who gave us the question of, well, what do you mean by if? Or what do you mean by and? Right? There was no one who was better at parsing words, right? And thus covering his tracks. Lying. He was a great prevaricator. Right? And he was great at it because he was very loyally and very subtle with the language. Okay? A lawyer can find a loophole in a contract. A shoemaker, a salt-of-the-earth guy cannot find a loophole in a contract. They usually make very poor lawyers. Okay? It's the more intelligent people who have the subtlety to lie well. Right? That's what he says here. It's precisely because they were so wise, okay, that they could be such good cheaters, as it were. They sought to hoodwink the Bnei Yisrael because the knowers of knowledge have ample opportunities to substitute lies for truth, as what differentiates the two are subtle, fine points. Yet every one of Israel possesses a point of clinging to God. Okay? This is the das, identifying cognition, I translate it as, given to Bnei Yisrael, through which they can discern the truth. Now listen to me for a second, before I read on. Let me tell you what he means. I told you before. There are 3 words. Chachma, Bina, Das. What's the nuance of difference between the two? Well, Chachma means something. Right? But the Greeks had it too. Saying Das is something uniquely Jewish. What is Das? What's the difference between Chachma and Das? So he's defining it here as follows. Okay? In Lashon Kodesh or biblical Hebrew, there are no homographs. There's no such thing as 2 dictionaries for the same word, that they shouldn't have a common root. Now, das is used in the Bible to mean something up here, and it can also mean something very physical. Okay? Vayeda Adam eschava ishle. Adam knew his wife Eve. Okay? It doesn't mean they filled out a 20-question questionnaire for sawyouatsinai.com. I'm getting to know you. Right? It means their bodies came together and united, physically. That's what it means he knew his wife. So das is that capacity of the mind to connect with what's being conceived. We have an expression for in English, I grasp what you're saying. Okay? When the mind grasps something, but grasps it in a way that it's not letting go, grasps it in a way that it's uniting, that it's becoming one. The knower and the knowledge become one, that's das. Yeah? Which is why also, parenthetically, Hasidic and Kabbalistic books, and I've said this over in many classes before, talk about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's a mistranslation. The correct translation is the tree of unity of good and evil. The Hebrew word is Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. The tree of das, of good and evil. What does the word das mean? Where good and evil became united, where good and evil became one, became mixed together, became inseparable for one another. That's what that tree was. So the word das means to be able to come together and unite with that which you're knowing. Whether it's physically or intellectually, it's the same meaning. That's what I meant before when I wrote identifying cognition. A cognition, a function of the brain, where you gain an identity. It's not something that I know, it's me. It's part of me. This knowledge, this bit of data, has now been incorporated into me. I'm part of it, it's part of me. That's what we mean in Hebrew when we say the word das. I mean, I'm not saying this, the Sfas Emes is saying this. Okay? Question, Elise.
No, I'm totally lost. I don't understand.
Which means I'm totally a bad teacher. What?
I'm just not following tonight, sorry.
Okay, let's try it again, okay? I can know something, okay? Here, you want me to, let me give you a good example. My Rosh Yeshiva, that's all I used to give, okay? We talk about a girl becoming a bas mitzvah or a boy becoming a bar mitzvah. Mm-hmm. We talk about them becoming a ben or a bas das, okay?
A doer.
Not a doer, a ben das.
Maybe I don't
Combined, unified.
Okay, so 1 second, okay? What this means is as follows, all right? I would call it in a certain sense, responsibility is weak. Responsibility doesn't capture the whole idea. But, for example, the Talmud says as follows, okay? If there's a long Talmudic Torah about something called the 4 Shomer, the 4 watchmen, the 4 different ways to take responsibility for watching something, right? So the Talmud says very clearly, you give an item over, you hire a shepherd boy, who's 12 years old, okay, and he's negligent, and he loses your sheep, okay, he's not responsible. He's not responsible. His parents are not responsible, right? You take the same shepherd boy 6 months later after his bar mitzvah, now he's responsible. We would call it the age of consent, a legal consenting adult, right?
Okay.
Your intelligence, your maturity, your emotional maturity, intellectual maturity is at the point where your yes means a yes, where your no means a no. Okay? That's not really the rub. The rub is, watch this. Okay, I'll watch it. Okay? A kid is flighty. I don't know what that means. Yeah, I know what it means. But it's not me yet. Right? If you're really responsible, right, you unify with the job. You identify with the job. I am a watchman until I'm released, until the owner of the sheep or the locket or whatever it is comes to pick it up and relieves me of my duty. Okay. This is what I am. Okay? Being able to take some of your intellectual armor, if you will, or data, treasure trove, and identifying with it. Saying, yeah, this is me. Okay?
That I understand.
Okay, so that's what das is.
Okay.
Okay? It's distinct from Chachma. Chachma can be something I know, but it's not necessarily me.
Okay.
All right? Now, I'm leading the witness already. Are you beginning to see why, right off the bat, das is truer than Chachma?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Fine.
Because with das, it like everyone was like intertwining. It's like 2 branches that are like a vine that goes around a tree. It becomes
or even growing together with a tree.
Right.
Okay.
It becomes one.
Okay, let's just finish up the last paragraph here. This is why oil was the medium for the Hanukkah miracle. Oil possesses a property of being drawn after the wick to the final drop. Now the Bnei Yisrael are comparable to oil in this respect. Okay, so first of all he's talking about fidelity, the ability to follow, if you will. We're drawn, there's an attractiveness, if you will, between God and us that draws us. If God is the wick, we are the oil that gets drawn into the wick, even to the point if it means our consumption. Even if it means what we call Mesiras Nefesh. We'll lose ourselves, but we'll disappear into God. That's the symbolism of the oil. As the prophet says, The Lord called thy name a leafy olive tree. Zeis Ranan is something the Navi Yirmiyah says God calls us. A leafy, a verdant olive tree. The Medrash explains why we call it an olive tree, not some other tree, because olive trees produce olive oil. Just as oil does not mix with other fluids, so too the Bnei Yisrael do not blend with other nations. Right? You ever make an oil and vinegar salad dressing? If you let it sit for 2 minutes, the vinegar will separate itself from the oil. Certainly oil and water, right? It separates. Oil always separates out. This was the deliverance of Hanukkah. For the Greeks sought to delude the Bnei Yisrael through Chachma. Right? They wanted us to assimilate. They wanted to become one big happy family. Hellenized Jews, all part of the Greek Empire. There are no chosen people. There is no intrinsic difference between Jews and Greeks. Wisdom, that's all it is. But the fundamental Das sensibility at the soul roots of Bnei Yisrael that is drawn after the truth was distilled. Distilled means it was clarified out. Like oil will separate itself from vinegar. In other words, that we have more than Chachma, which is outer, which is external, which you don't need to identify with to be a Baal Chachma. To be a Baal Das, you've got to identify with something. And in particular, we mean over here, to identify with the inner content of the Chachma, which is God Himself. Right? We're drawn after God. In that way, we're like olive oil. And the chosenness of the chosen people, we are separate from the other nations of the world in that capacity. And that's what became clear in the salvation from the Greeks. It wasn't just a military conquest. It was, you're not going to be a footnote in history. You're not going to be just another empire that disappears, not an empire, whatever, a people that disappear off of the world stage. Right? There's something unique about Jewish sensibility, aka Torah, that's eternal and separate, and cannot be absorbed, and cannot be co-opted by the nations of the world. This was the relative superiority of Das over Chachma. Okay. 1 second. I'm going to take questions, but it's getting late now. We have a very good collation. We have brownies and sufganiyot. We have the traditional jelly donuts for Hanukkah. I'll take any questions or comments you want now. This handout is yours to keep. I urge you to take it home. It's Torah literature, so dispose of it properly. Right, Mrs. Bennett?